All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the 2022 GNOVIS Colloquium. Just a quick note, we are recording just for future reference and posterity. Welcome to the 2022 GNOVIS Colloquium. If you are new to our community, GNOVIS is the peer review student-run academic journal for the Communications, Culture, and Technology program at the Georgetown University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. So we are super excited to be here. And in true CCT fashion, this is a brand new format for us. So I hope that you can be patient with us as we figure this out. We have two great panels with us today. We have one panel on misinformation in society, and we have one panel on LGBTQ plus representation in contemporary media. We've got some student researchers. We've also got some faculty represented here today. So we are super excited to be here and are looking forward to a lively discussion. So to get us started, I'm going to turn this over to our director of the CCT program, Dr. Tinkham. Dr. Tinkham, if you can say some introductory words.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you and great to be here. I woke up this morning and was delighted to find the issue of GNOVIS in my mailbox, and what a delightful surprise that was. And so I'm here to congratulate this extraordinary effort, and extraordinary it is. This group of people, the editorial team at GNOVIS, as well as the authors and the readers and the CCT community, have produced a beautiful thing. And one of the things I want to say about GNOVIS is that it's been a signature of CCT from the beginning. And part of that signature is that this is student run. It's a student run journal that sort of honors really the core values of what the university is about, not just Georgetown, but all universities. And that is a series of values associated with intellectual freedom, the ability to explore ideas without limits, but doing that in community, in dialogue, and getting sort of in conversation about work as it progresses, and doing that collegially and respectfully so that work can improve and become the best that it can be. And that happens through the careful guidance of a team like the GNOVIS editorial team. And I want to thank them, starting with Rohan Samji, who's been the editor-in-chief this year, and Erica Hiran-Moon, Hussein Panahoff, and Andrew Peacock, who are a really astonishing group of people who worked collegially under really frustrating and challenging circumstances often. They pulled it off. They've honored GNOVIS with their achievement. And then as well, the authors, because if there's no content, if there's no one doing research and writing. So the authors are to be commended as well. And then the readers, which is that a part of the sort of activity of making GNOVIS is getting everyone in the community involved in giving each other feedback. And so that's a really big deal. I'm just here simply to congratulate this team on a really wonderful effort. And then to say, we're going to have a colloquium this morning, which unfortunately I can't stay for all of, but want to mention that, colloquium comes from the Latin word meaning to speak together. And it doesn't mean to speak together in one voice, but it means to speak together in multiple voices in conversation. And that's what we're going to be doing this morning. And it honors the highest values of what we do at Georgetown. So with that, I'll stop talking and simply hand the applause over to this editorial team for their incredible work. So thank you all. And I hope it's a great colloquium today. I know it will be.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tinkham. So we're gonna get right into our panels this morning. So we have two discussions and not a lot of time. So this morning, we're going to start with our Misinformation in Society panel, which is being moderated by one of our editors, Hussein Panahoff. A quick little housekeeping note, if you do have a question, which we welcome, please submit them through the Q&A form at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom link. We will be moderating those and we will answer the ones that we are able to. If we aren't able to get to everybody's question, we will be capturing those, and the authors will be able to answer them either on social media through a video or directly via email after the fact. So please, please, please submit your questions as you go through. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Hussein to handle our panel.
Thank you, Erica. I'm very happy to be part of this event today, honored and privileged to be in this digital academic environment with you all. In this panel, my esteemed classmates, colleagues, Pan Wang and Megan Hearst will present findings of their outstanding research on misinformation in digital age, as you may know. However, first, we will have brief opening remarks by distinguished guest, Professor Diane Owen, who is a well-recognized and influential scholar in the field of media and politics. She's a professor of political science in the Communication, Culture, and Technology graduate program, and director and principal investigator of the Civic Education Research Lab at Georgetown University. She's written several books and countless scholarly articles on media messaging, misinformation, politics of communication, and so on. Professor Owen is an American Political Science Association Congressional Media Fellow. To be honest, our panel would not be enough to go through all achievements and contributions. So I'll stop here. Professor Owen, thank you for joining us. Floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Hussein, and thank you to all of the GNOVIS team for bringing this together. I'm just going to make some brief remarks about misinformation and its implications, and to kind of give, I guess, a framework for the two papers that will be presented in a minute. First, a point that I think comes out of both of the papers is that what's meant by misinformation is not really straightforward. Some definitions emphasize that misinformation is anything that's false or inaccurate or out of context that's presented as fact and spread widely, regardless of the intent to deceive. But disinformation has been specifically defined by scholars as a type of misinformation that is created with the intention to deceive. There's also many other terms that are used to kind of capture aspects of misinformation, such as junk news, a term that's coined by the Oxford Internet Institute, which covers various forms of propaganda, ideologically extreme, hyperpartisan, or conspiratorial political news and information that's verifiably false and presented as factual, which we'll learn about in Megan Hearst's paper today. These two papers that will be presented by Fan Wang and Megan Hearst are really excellent, and they provide evidence of the strong and even dangerous effects of misinformation. Fan Wang's paper demonstrates convincingly with strong empirical analysis that misinformation about the pandemic shared on Twitter, YouTube, websites, other social media that broker falsehoods attract tremendous attention. In some cases, the misinformation is shared more widely in these sources than information in some legitimate news agencies, which is pretty troubling. Megan Hearst's paper is a fascinating and extremely well-researched work that explores parallel trends in the satanic panic of the 1980s and present-day QAnon. She deftly illustrates how the spread of false information is not new, but has been influenced by a number of factors, concluding the deregulation of the media during the Reagan administration and shifts in the way that people consume news, especially through social media. Just some general observation again about misinformation. First, misinformation is widespread and people are aware that it's out there. About 80% of Americans have indicated that they've been exposed to misinformation at least sometimes, and most of these people indicate that they've been misled by it. And misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic has been rampant since the day one of the pandemic. There are a number of troubling and deleterious effects of misinformation that I think these papers capture in different ways. First, people are easily influenced by misinformation. Misinformation distorts people's understanding of important issues, events, and occurrences, and it becomes lodged in people's memories and is really difficult to correct. Second, misinformation makes people less trusting of government, political leaders, political processes, and legitimate news organizations. Exposure to misinformation creates doubts in people's minds about what is true and what is false. It exacerbates political cynicism as people adopt a generalized view that the political system is corrupt and politicians are only out for themselves. Even the perception that misinformation is everywhere influences people's attitudes and erodes trust. Misinformation decreases satisfaction with American democracy and erodes faith in the core political processes like elections. Next, misinformation undermines the media's watchdog role, especially when misinformation is disseminated through legacy or mainstream channels. The antidote to the problem of misinformation, which is often fact-checking types of operations, can have the opposite effects. These types of warnings can cause people to be even more mistrusting of information in general, including facts. Misinformation undermines political discourse. Kind of thinking about Megan's paper, Larry Sabato, back in the era of the Satanic Panic, identified something that he called junkyard dog journalism, where anything goes as long as it attracts an audience and stirs the pot. And I think the situation today is worse than when Sabato made his observation because of social media. Misinformation sidetracks serious discussion, and it takes away from issues as energy is spent countering charges and claims, and lots of uncivil discourse that results from that. Misinformation creates a we versus them attitude, which generates hostility. It creates more political polarization as the inflammatory rhetoric is heightened. And finally, misinformation can lead to violence. Of course, the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol is a prime example, but it's sad to say that the recent shooting in Buffalo that was racially motivated, as the shooter was mobilized by misinformation transmitted by the Great Replacement theory, is just another in a long line of examples. So with that, I'd like to yield the floor. Thank you, and I look forward to the papers, and I really recommend them, that people read them. They're great.
Thank you very much, Professor Owen, for your insightful remarks. Now we'll give the floor to Fan Wang, who graduated from the CCT program at Georgetown University in 2020. Currently, she's enrolled in a PhD program in interpersonal communication program in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of Texas in Austin. Her research interests are interpersonal health communication, social media data analytics, and emerging communication technologies. Fan, thank you. Floor is yours.
Hi, Hussein. Thank you so much for introducing me. And also, hi, Professor Owen and Professor Markovsky. It's really nice to be here and see you again. And hello, novice, and hello, CCT student. And here I'm presenting my study to you. So for my study, basically, I just want to know, like, when people talk about vaccine, and a lot of people say, oh, there are a lot of misinformation about vaccine. So I want to know, when people talk about it on Twitter, what kind of evidence they use, like what kind of hyperlink they use, and where are those sources. So for this study, I collected almost 4,000 tweets in a 4-day frame, and that is that 4-day frame is the COVID-19 vaccine was approved to use as an emergency use by the FDA. So people will talk about this kind of news and this kind of issue more during that days. So which is like better for data collection. And so the result is that, can we go to next page? Yes, here is my findings. So I draw this social network graph with a software called Node XL Pro, and it can help you draw this kind of SNA SNA graph, and also it can identify the clusters in those nodes. So we can see in the middle, those square part are the website's name. And the little dots are actually users who are sharing these links, these websites' name in their tweets. And I found top 29 most shared websites, and they are all scattering in these 20 clusters. And it's very interesting to see that actually most of the domain, we say like the website names are very credible news agencies like New York Times, like WSJ, and also there are two misinformation websites are like highlighted by some fact-checking agencies. One is the CHD in group 3. You can see the dark green part in the left corner, in the left bottom corner. There is called CHD. That is called Children Health Defense Organization. That one is a very big anti-vacciner community, and it has very strong influence on the social network. The other one is the Zero Hedge in G17, the red cluster in the middle right. So that one is also a misinformation spread website, and also it has the alerted by fact-checking agencies. These are the two misinformation websites among all these credible websites. And also it's interesting, you can see the YouTube in G2 and also Twitter in G13. These two social media platforms are also cited or referred by the Twitter users when they talk about vaccine. It's kind of disturbing is that it's very hard to verify the information shared by these two platforms, by these two links, or information or misinformation. So my conclusion, can we go to the next page? So my conclusion is, firstly, we find like most people share the most about the credible websites, which is good. But also it's very disturbing is that misinformation websites, even though the amount is small, but their influence is very huge. It can be very competitive compared with some credible information websites. And also the third one is that some YouTube social media platforms are actually the epicenter of misinformation that needs more work to for people or for the organization or for the company to verify, to help the audience, the users, to verify whether they are information or misinformation. In my studies, I have some like practical implications. I think firstly for vaccine promotion organizations, they should create strategies targeting young misinformation, such as providing sufficient evidence and encourage dialogue. And also for media platforms, like YouTube, a social media platform, they should take responsibility for responding to misinformation. And also for scholars like you and me and some experts, and already a lot of great scholars, they're already advocating for organization to provide timely and credible corrections. And also experts, they can also help to correct health misinformation. And that last but not least is for lay people. It's like for audience or common people on social media. Like we need to like share more high quality content, which can help dilute the influence of misinformation. And that's it for my study. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fan. That was very interesting, and I hope we'll come back to some of the points you made in the Q&A session. And here, I'd like to encourage our audience, please post your questions. They will definitely make a very interesting discussion after the second presentation, which will be delivered by Megan Hearst. Megan is finishing her first year in the Communication, Culture, and Technology program here at Georgetown. Prior to enrolling at Georgetown University, she received her undergraduate degrees in Film and Media Studies and English Literature from Whitman College, and spent time working as an associate editor and producer in documentary film. Megan's academic interests include media ethics, misinformation and disinformation, and media democratization. Megan, please, the floor is yours.
Hello. All right, so I'm so glad to be here, and I'll give a very quick overview of what my paper goes over. So the principle that really drove my paper is that QAnon is not a novel phenomenon. It has frequently been described as a strange novel phenomenon, but it's actually the newest iteration of a very, very old idea. The last time this idea entered mainstream consciousness in a big way was during a period in the 1980s and 90s labeled as the Satanic Panic. These events are both examples of what is known as a moral panic, and I will go further into depth on that concept in the next slide. So there we are. So this study focuses on the role of the media as a panic amplifier during both events. So the media often doesn't generate the panic in and of itself. Rather, it creates a spiral, it is often described, where basically by labeling and re-emphasizing this panic, it increases the panic around it. It increases the demonizing rhetoric around this group, these people, this whole concept that they're discussing. So this research is basically designed to look at two events that parallel each other, both in the general story they tell, the themes they hit, the demonization which occurred, and to kind of look at what's changed, what's remained the same, and to look at how the media and the media deregulation, which occurred in the 1980s, set the stage for an event like this to happen. And again, how the deregulated environment on social media set the stage again for something like this to recur. So to just give a brief overview of the theory that I used as a framework for this analysis, I'm going to quote the great Stanley Cohen, who is considered the forefather of this theory. Sadly, he passed away in 2013. So it's a lot of people have remarked that this is kind of the moment where his theories have kind of regained recognition during this current period of time. So he starts off on his first page by of his classic work, Folk Devils and Moral Panics, 1972, by saying that societies appear to be subject every now and then to periods of moral panic. A condition, episode, person, or group of persons emerges to become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. Its nature is presented in a stylized and stereotypical fashion by mass media. Moral barricades are manned by editors, bishops, politicians, and other right-thinking people. Socially accredited experts pronounce their diagnoses and solutions. Ways of coping are evolved, or more often resorted to. The condition then disappears, submerges, or deteriorates, and becomes more visible. So, to paraphrase this, something or someone is defined as a threat to societal values or interests. The threat is depicted in a recognizable form by the media. There is a rapid buildup of concern. There is a response from authorities or opinion makers and opinion leaders. And the panic either recedes or society itself changes, it gets adopted into mainstream discourse. So moral panic is a term that has been floating around in various forms since the 1800s, but the concept that we're talking about was coined in 1971 by sociologist Jock Young, and it really crystallized with the publication of this book, Folk Devils and Moral Panics, which basically examines the British media's reaction to a series of basically pretty widespread hooliganism by what they called mods and rockers back in the time, and kind of the media's reaction, labeling this as kind of a clarion call that this was societal decline and that this was a hallmark of a world gone mad, rather than just looking at these as isolated events of hooliganism, which occurred. And you've likely seen moral panics in your own life. Think about the way that people have reacted to, for example, Black Lives Matter protesters, or the way that people have reacted to various events of social unrest in just recent history. These could all be labeled as moral panics. So it's important to discuss that this theory has limitations, namely that in our modern fragmented media environment, that there isn't a sort of consensus anymore, that you cannot kind of compel people en masse to believe such things. But modern moral panic theorists basically suggest that this fragmentation doesn't necessarily mean that this theory is dead. It means that it has become more specialized and atomized to particular groups. So, and the other one, which people label, is that it's a perceived valuative judgment, which basically it's saying that this is a disproportionate, irrational reaction. And it's basically the elites, to use a term that QAnon followers are fond of, looking down upon people for reacting to certain events in certain ways. This critique, I do believe, has some legitimacy, particularly for the ways that it has been used in the past. But I still find this incredibly useful, specifically the steps and the pattern to look at what happens. So it's also important to note that the other limitation for my study is that with QAnon, the whole time I was writing this, I kept on laughing because it seemed that every day there was a new headline that directly had to do with my topic. And I was like, I cannot have an addendum that is 50 pages long with everything that's happened since I've written this. So, and I would love in questions for people to ask me about more modern events, but things are rapidly unfolding in this field. So I can move on. Let's see. So in both cases, deregulation in the media sector created opportunity. In these cases, I focused in on cable TV during the Satanic Panic versus social media platforms during QAnon. During the 1980s, television in general and cable TV more specifically was deregulated by moves made by the FCC, specifically the FCC head, Mark Fowler, who basically said that television is an appliance. It's just a toaster with pictures. And so think of that what you will, but it profoundly affected the medium. And social media platforms have long been protected by Section 230, which basically protects them from liability for third-party content, content that is posted by people who don't work for them, basically. So what this means is that they can prioritize content that gets the most reaction. So this basically has set it up so the most inflammatory content rises to the top. So what results is that competition is heightened. There's new media forms. There's more media out there. And journalistic standards are lowered because the barriers to entry are lowered. The barriers of regulation are lowered, giving the perfect opportunities for actors, sometimes known as moral entrepreneurs, basically people who are peddling a particular worldview to enter the scene. So these individuals peddle sensationalist rhetoric, and should this fear catch on, it can blossom into a moral panic. I talk a bit specifically about QAnon influencers and specifically about Geraldo Rivera for Satanic Panic. So then a spiral occurs, more media coverage is generated, followers join the cause, and that there's no definitive end to such panics, as illustrated by the Satanic Panic example. Rather, media coverage subsides over time. So part of the reason why this particular panic has had such staying power is because it is patterned on a very old cultural narrative known as blood libel, which is basically this concept that others in society, typically people who are perceived as sexually deviant or religiously deviant, especially Jews, it's a very anti-Semitic myth, are preying upon your children in sacrificial and demonic ways. So what this is to say is that the road out of QAnon will be difficult, even more difficult than the road out of the Satanic Panic. But there are reasons to have hope. We have seen recently with deplatformings and the discussions around Section 230 that there is some hope out of this. And I would love to discuss that more. Yes.
Thank you very much, Megan. So we'll now go into the Q&A session. I'll start with the first question. It comes from Monique Wingard. She's asking for Fan Wang, what role, if any, should the government play in combating or simply monitoring disinformation, misinformation, especially considering the recent news about the DHS pausing or ending the Disinformation Governance Board? Fan, please.
Hi, Monique. Thank you so much for your information. Yes, I didn't give any suggestion for government, how they should react this, because personally, we know that people actually blame CDC a lot since the start from the COVID-19 beginning, because it has very delayed information, and also their inconsistency in their policies, so which makes the government role in the COVID-19, at least at the beginning, is pretty less credible than before. So personally, I think government information, at least their policy or their news releasing, should be as consistent as possible. That's how the credibility of the government is built on those. Yes, the credibility is built on the consistency. That is the most important element. And thank you.
Thank you, Fan. Next question from the audience. Do you think media literacy and adding more education about the harmful effects of satanic panic, etc., should be enacted in our public school systems? Megan, this question is for you.
I mean, absolutely. Ideally, yes. Do I have much hope that it would be consistently enacted? No, simply because school curriculum are very localized, very state-based, and this issue is very politicized, even though you actually find Satanic Panic and QAnon theories across the political spectrum, more heavily on the right, but it's actually not as politicized as you may think it is on first glance. But I do believe that media literacy education would be very important. And it's such a shame, particularly in the case of the Satanic Panic, that I think it's such an important historical event to discuss right now. And it is not discussed. It is not discussed at all, even though it has had profound effects on our culture and on the lives of the people affected. The most expensive and long-running criminal trial in American history was a Satanic Panic trial. This is not discussed in our schools. I did not learn about this until about 2 years back, and that was through just stumbling upon a random article. And so I would love to see this being being a part of our curriculum in schools.
Thank you, Megan. If I may follow up on this point, because we had a discussion on a similar topic recently in one of the classes that I was part of. And the idea is that data literacy, we sometimes think that can be the solution, but it in itself can be also part of the problem, because who shapes the media literacy, right? Who is going to prepare that curriculum? Who is going to shape what should be presented? And what kind of approaches would be better, and so on. And sometimes, certain parts of the society might accept it as that, yes, this is the right approach, but others would not find it acceptable for them. And they might feel like they are kind of outliers, and it could contribute for them to, being more angry in certain cases. So could you tell us a little more, for one, what other approaches do you see as solutions besides media literacy? And if media literacy it is, then do you have any recommendations specific to media literacy?
Let's see. There is a good question around stigmatizing certain groups. And also one thing that gets discussed, because I discuss at a certain point about the fairness doctrine, is also the threat of creating a false equivalency if we are dealing with kind of media literacy and, you need to see both sides. So I personally, I recently kind of delved into this idea of a wicked problem, which basically a wicked problem doesn't have an easy solution. It has multiple strategies to combat it. I don't think that media education alone can help people kind of get out of this. I think that it's a start. I think that media literacy, as well as the way that we get educated about history, the way that we get educated about video, even video production and editing. There's so many things that we don't get taught about that we have to kind of learn on our own. But I personally don't have that many answers when it comes to how to form a better media literacy campaign, simply because, again, it's so wicked and naughty. I think that depending on who you are, where you are, what we're talking about, it really has to be formatted to that. Which is, not a satisfying answer, I'm aware, but, it's a wicked problem.
No, thank you very much. Obviously, it is not an easy answer question. maybe nobody even knows what is the answer to that question, probably. The next question also comes from our audience to Ken Wang. In your conclusions, you note that media platforms and expert organizations should provide timely and credible corrections to misinformation. How do you respond to recent research showing that social media audiences tend to stick to their existing opinions rather than change their minds based on what they see in social media? Ken, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm processing this question. I don't know whether I'm understanding it right. So you're asking, like people stay more in their original view rather than change a little bit by some other information. Am I right?
I believe so. Yes. Generally, the question is asking like how social media basically. The algorithms, they put us a place where we stick to the same sources of information. It's very difficult to get out of that bubble and shift, to another kind of a algorithmic kind of a place where you'd get different kinds of informations. And so yeah. I guess that's what it relates to. And I also copy paste the question in the chat for you, just in case.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's very interesting. Yes, the algorithm, like those news or videos like recommended to you according to your previous click. And it's very, very disturbing because due to those very smarter and smarter algorithm, like the Facebook or YouTube, they will recommend more like what you like. So what you don't like, you will have no access to them unless you try to search it by yourself. You really type into those keywords by yourself. Otherwise, the recommend page can only be our own favorite thing. So it's very problematic, and we can see that more and more literatures and studies are like tackling these algorithm thing, but it's a sad fact that yes, nowadays people read more about their likes, but about what they don't like, unless they try to do it by themselves.
Thank you very much. And one last question. I would be happy if you could both kind of give your answers to this question. You both kind of talked about this, right? What is the role of the medium, of the social media platforms currently? For example, in Megan's presentation, what stood out to me is the fact that back in the day, in the 80s, when the first like that satanic panic was happening, the current social media environment did not exist. But there are so many similarities. Megan also mentioned about some similarities and the differences that this current, state of information exchange happens in the social media environment. Like the barriers are lower, right? It's on one hand, it's good because there's freedom of expression, everybody can contribute, but then there is the negative flip side of it is that, a lot of people don't want to share accurate information. Sometimes intentionally or unintentionally, they provide misinformation. And as I understand, some studies have even shown that for some reason, misinformation circulates faster through social media platforms versus the true information or more factual news. So what do you think would be like moving forward? And we kind of slightly touched upon this with Megan, like she talked about media literacy as being one of the avenues of approach. But for one, which stakeholder you think is most to blame or should absorb most of the kind of fault for this happening? Is it like cultural thing? Is it something that you cannot even eliminate? It's always going to be there. Is it the regulatory kind of agencies like Section 230? It should be more elaborate and more comprehensive. Or is it, again, educational system? Is it the algorithms and social media platforms that are doing this? So where do you think is kind of like the trap? Where do you think, who's to blame? And what do you think moving forward would be better approaches to improve upon this? Just a few of your thoughts would be very much appreciated.
So Megan, I'll go first. Well, I think it's really hard to find a target like who should be blamed, because if we say so, everybody should be blamed, because we are all responsible for these social media platforms. Because our voices are there, right? And I think there is a kind of traditional communication theory called uses and gratifications theory, and it talks about like how users, how the audience, we manipulate or we use those different media like agencies or channels to get information, and how we process those information. So from my point of view, I think everybody has this ability and has this power to decide whether I should say something on social media or not, right? And also we also have this responsibility to judge whether what I've written in this tweet is information or misinformation. And we also need to provide evidence in our tweet, and either is from a link or from our like deeper thoughts to bolster this idea. So I feel very like grateful that we can have those social media platforms to voice everybody's voices, rather than just those like government channels or news agencies like Fox News or CNN News, but people have no free views to share their own information. So that's the good side of the social media platform, I think.
So yeah, I'll hop in, and it's interesting what you just said there, because actually that was part of the reason why some people believed that moral panic theory would be dead. And it was because they believed that social media would serve as a rebuttal to panic, basically, that now victims or even just bystanders could go, no, this is silly, let's stop. And as we can see, that's not really what happened. But I do agree that there is some personal responsibility here. For me personally, it kind of manifests in the form of whenever I see a story and it immediately, you can feel it in your gut. You feel that rush of adrenaline, of indignation, to always pause and go, what is this? Why am I feeling this? What is in fact actually going on? Because so much of this QAnon posting, for example, which I discovered, was people not necessarily buying into the whole thing, but just reacting, oh my gosh, something terrible is happening to children. I need to share this immediately. And then unintentionally sharing misinformation. And it's just something to be aware of. I know very intelligent people who have shared QAnon related content simply because they were deeply concerned about what this story was saying. But I think just thinking before you're sharing, thinking before you're reacting in these broad ways is so important. But beyond that, when we're looking at the scope, a lot of responsibility does also lie with social media companies who directly profited from this sort of behavior. There was a report that was linked when Frances Haugen shared all those Facebook files from Facebook that literally was called Carol's Journey into QAnon. And it was all about this hypothetical woman, Carol, that they created as a profile, and how just by being in the world as this average middle-aged suburbanite woman, they basically designed her to be, she was drawn into these QAnon groups. And why? Because these QAnon groups are very engaging. They keep people engaged for a long, long time. And so I think that short of any sort of major reform, noting this and publicizing this and looking at, hey, what is this? Why are you letting people being sucked into this vortex in this way? Can help, because after those reports were leaked, Facebook did a massive purge. They've had to do repeated purges, but I think publicizing this and talking about this is very important. Holding them accountable is very important.
Thank you very much for your very valuable thoughts. There was a very insightful discussion. I hope our audience also appreciated it. Now we're a little bit actually over the time. We're going to go into a break. Erica, would you like to say a few things? I guess we'll take a 10-minute break now.
Yes, so believe it or not, we are at our we are at our first hour. So great discussion, everybody. Thank you, Fan, Megan, and Dr. Owen. I'm sorry, my coffee has not hit this morning, clearly. So we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back for panel number 2. So grab some water, and we will be back here at 11:05. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're getting ready for round 2. We're moving on to a new session. Again, same rules as last time. We're going to have 2 panelists and our faculty member discussing the topic itself and some of the research, and then we will move on to Q&A. As we go through these presentations, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A button on at the bottom of your screen. So moving into this, I'd like to introduce our faculty representative today. We have Dr. Michael Makovsky, who is CCT faculty, specifically dealing in the media studies, new media. He's a great source of information on fandom, which we're definitely going to dive into today in these conversations. So Dr. Makovsky, do you want to introduce our topic?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. So first I want to thank GNOVIS. The whole staff has really been amazing this year, and this edition that's coming out, just came out today, is really special. So this is a great editorial executive staff. So the 2 papers today came out of a class I taught last fall. Really 2 spectacular final projects that came out. They really galvanized the class. And I learned so much from these 2 researchers. You'll see that both articles deploy the term fans in the title. Both Maj and Robin have new takes on that. You may think of the term that CCT people know in this context, participatory culture, coined by Henry Jenkins in 1992. But one definition of a publishable paper, an article really, is that you make a contribution to the field, and these 2 papers really do. They really do. So they go beyond concepts of participatory culture and analyze more recent concepts and contributions. One of them is network counterpublics, and you're going to be hearing about that today too. But more generally, you'll see that these concepts of fan culture and participatory culture go far beyond what's been said before. They talk about online dialogues with fans, between fans and let's say a television show. But in this case, the fan text becomes part of the media text. You can't even understand the full meaning of the media show like a television show. You can't even understand it unless you include the fan text. That's the genius of these 2 papers. That's the genius. It really hasn't been discussed before. So it's going way beyond a concept like Jürgen Habermas's idea of the public sphere. So what are we trying to understand with this new combination? Well, in this session today, we're trying to understand what these online dialogues tell us about marginalized groups. In this case, particularly queer communities. Now, we've just had a great paper on misinformation. There is so much misinformation about queer communities throughout the online world. So these papers are particularly important. There's been discussion among queer studies scholars in the trans world and beyond. And some of the terms that come up are these. There's a book about realness. It's called Redefining Realness, and it's applying it to queer identity. What is a real identity? Real identity. So those terms, real and identity, come up quite a bit. Another term that comes up in the contemporary criticism is authenticity. What's an authentic identity? And one that you're going to see a lot today is the idea of representation. How do you represent a marginalized community? And of course, that's central. Again, you see it in the fan text, you'll see it in the media itself, but it's more nuanced than I think any of us thought before, certainly before I read these 2 papers. So what do we mean when we say the representation of a marginalized community? Well, you normally would think that it just has to be a real, accurate narrative about that community. But again, these 2 scholars that you're going to hear today go deeper into the topic, the really an original approach and a really insightful approach is both of them. For instance, there's been much discussion about this representation, but what about the actual relationships between people within these communities? Or very subtly, the relationships between someone who is in a marginalized community and someone who is not, maybe in the cis world. Again, not much done about it at all. This is incredibly original scholarship. They look at things like romance, which is a difficult topic, but an absolutely compelling one. Both papers look at romance. They analyze the concept with great insight and even compassion too. Hardikar's article 2 deals with representation, goes in a different direction, asks questions which I find, again, incredibly insightful. Things like, how do you represent someone's identity from a marginalized community? One, how about, for instance, if the real identity is only hinted at? Is that just a form of marketing? Is it deceptive? What about if someone's real identity is kind of teasingly alluded to, almost humorously? Is that real representation or not? What about if a queer character is represented, but only in a very minor way, or as Professor Tinkham has talked about in his book on Brokeback Mountain, what if the character meets a tragic end? Is that real representation in a way that's really going to affect the larger community, the larger world? Maja's article is fascinating in that it argues that fans can actually supersede what would seem to be the immediate meaning of a show. They can go beyond it and create a new meaning that becomes part of what's disseminated. It's the opposite of misinformation. So these papers, I can't tell you how much I learned from them. I mean, really, it was completely gratifying for me. I'm grateful to both scholars, since I learned so much from them. And I look forward to our discussion, and I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Makowski, for joining us and those amazing words. So we're going to start with Robin Calleja. We're going to talk about Screaming at the Television, How Pose Fans Interrogate Cross-Gender Relationships. Robin is currently pursuing her master's at the CCT program. Her research focus is popular culture, online communities, and virtual identities. So Robin, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Awesome. Good morning. Thank you, Novis, for having me here. As Erica said, I'm Robin Calleja, and I am the author of Screaming at the Television. Professor Makowski mentioned Jürgen Habermas earlier, and he has this concept called the public sphere. And it is a public space that we occupy and share with others, where we interact with members of our communities. It is also a space where we discuss publicly relevant issues, ranging from our political opinions to our hot takes on the popular media texts we consume. The public sphere is influential and significant because it can shape, reinforce, and uphold the dominant worldview and biases of a society. There are a few types of spaces that come to my mind when I think of the public sphere. There's the agora in Greek cities. In the ancient Greek cities, there's Sproul Plaza in Berkeley, my alma mater. And here in Georgetown, we have the Red Square. And of course, in high school, we had the cafeterias, and in elementary school, we had the playgrounds where we determined what was cool and established what was cringe. Dana Boyd expanded on this idea of the public sphere by applying it to the virtual spaces that we occupy. She refers to them as network publics, as they are publics that bind people together through technological networks. And the more popular iterations would be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. Some would argue that TikTok and YouTube would be a part of it as well. But one of the criticisms about the publics and is their tendency to reproduce and impose the mainstream society's dominant ideologies. And sometimes that would include things like the patriarchy, capitalism, or cis heteronormativity as my work is concerned. And this is all while marginalizing minority viewpoints. So in the context of gender and sexuality, this would be marginalizing ideas that subvert gender norms and expectations. This brings us to these two other ideas, the counterpublics and the network counterpublics, which are pretty much similar to the public sphere in as much as they are also shared spaces where we interact and engage in discourse with other people. But they differ from publics and network publics in as so far as they challenge the mainstream dominant discourse and ideology. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the ideas and perspectives that we bring into the publics and the network publics are largely informed by our expectations and interactions with other individuals with influential institutions like Hollywood. So for instance, think about the entertainment industry and the cultural artifacts that they give us. And so the public's perception of an underrepresented and marginalized group can be greatly influenced by what we see on our television screens and on our news feeds. These perceptions and biases are then reproduced in the publics and in the network counterpublics. And considering how a recent Pew Research study found that less than half of adults in the United States know a transgender person, most of the country only really know trans people based on what they hear about the community or what they see in the media text. And sadly, since the invention of film, those representations have been caricaturized reproductions of real complex identities and dynamic experiences. We see that this ranges from reductive comedic tropes that we would see in cartoons and sitcoms like Family Guy, South Park, and How I Met Your Mother, to the more harmful tropes like cross-dressing murderers in Alfred Hitchcock's films and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. As GLAAD's Nick Adams puts it, Hollywood has been teaching people how to react to trans people for decades now. And it wasn't until recently when we started seeing more accurate and thoughtful representations of trans women through actresses like Dominique Jackson, Angelica Ross, Laverne Cox, and Jen Richards, and writers and producers like Janet Mock and Our Lady J. The inclusion of trans people both on screen and in the writing and production process are significant in as much as the trans actors don't have to perform the transness of their character. They don't have to act out the transness of their character. And while the trans writers are able to just write from their experiences and have a more authentic voice and iteration of what's being produced on screen. And we see that in Ryan Murphy's Pose, which I discuss on this paper. And while Pose as a television show series follows the fictional lives of several queer and trans people of color in the late 80s, early 90s New York City ballroom scene, my work primarily examines how a cross-gender relationship between a trans woman and a cis man is portrayed in the first season of the series and how the audience responded to this relationship. I thought this would be an interesting research because there is this intriguing correlation between trans romance on screen and in real life. That is, there's a lack of cross-gender romantic relationships being portrayed on screen. And simultaneously, there's a research by Blair and Hodgkins, I believe, and Hoskin. And it pretty much found that a large majority of people are still very hesitant when it comes to dating trans people because of the shame and stigma attached to it. And think the total number that they got was 87%, and that included queer people that were uncomfortable dating other trans people. So I thought that was an interesting correlation. And so to have the main romantic story arc of this popular show be about an openly trans woman, Angel, and a cis straight man, Stan, is pretty groundbreaking. What I love about the Stangel arc, as I like to call it, is the way that the writers beautifully capture this tension between the very human desire to love and be loved by someone and the pressure that people experience whenever they date someone who's completely outside of their world. With Stan, it's this tension between what appears to be a genuine attraction towards Angel, who is a very beautiful woman, but just happens to be trans, and also this pressure from, from his white-collar, middle-class suburban life as a married man. And so we get these remarkable scenes where Stan is depicted as gentle, respectful, and intimate, asking Angel if he could kiss her, as you see here in the slides. And these tender moments are interestingly juxtaposed with the more bitter scenes. So their passionate kiss cuts to Stan vigorously brushing his teeth as if he's trying to disinfect his mouth after kissing a trans woman. And I thought that was a very interesting way of depicting this relationship and capturing that tension between desire and shame. And this will they, won't they cliche carries over throughout the first season when Stan was still part of the cast. And what is even more significant about this arc is the audience response and how much fans on Reddit hated Stan, particularly with the flaky and non-committal way he treats Angel. And granted, this relationship started off as an affair, but it's quite evident in the series that much of his shame comes from being attracted to a trans woman rather than committing an affair. And so the subreddit that I examined, PostFX, being a predominantly queer fan community, functions as a network counterpublic, in as much as fans who occupy this virtual space offer a queer perspective on Stan and Angel's cross-gender relationship. The way they unpack the relationship in the context of their own queer experiences is evident in their discussions. And that's why it makes so much sense that they are very sensitive to Stan's flakiness and very sympathetic towards Angel's own experience dating Stan. Next slide, please. There are three things that I learned in studying the Stangel arc and Pose as a network counterpublic. And the first one is new media can complement traditional media by extending the discussions beyond the screen to a shared space. And the second, as much as LGBTQ fans really love authentic representation, and even though transphobia and homophobia are very much part of the real experiences, a lot of fans also want to see a more lighthearted aspect of the trans experience portrayed rather than just the tragic tropes. And lastly, as a queer-dominated online community, PoseFX serve as a network counterpublics that challenge the dominant cis-hetero narrative and ideology of the mainstream society. And what we can observe in these fan communities then is similar to how we talk back to the television screen or scream at it whenever a character does something stupid. But instead of screaming into a void, fans express their thoughts and their thoughts about the media text to a public space, thereby creating opportunities for meaningful and critical discourse. There's so much that can be said about publics and counterpublics and online communities post LGBTQ plus representation, but there's only so much that you can talk about in a 10-minute presentation. But I do hope that you found this presentation interesting and informative. And if you did, I hope you check out GNOVIS edition of GNOVIS edition of the journal this year. Thank you all very much, and I hope you were able to learn a lot from this.
Thank you, Robin. Great job. Yeah, and the article is really interesting, so we welcome you guys to go take a look at everything. And again, if you guys have questions, please feel free to submit those via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Moving on to our next author, we've got Maj Hardikar, who is discussing fake people kissing, queerbaiting, and fan agency. Maj comes to us from NYU and is currently pursuing her master's of the CCT program. Her research focus is queer theory, popular culture studies, and how communities function in online spaces. So take it away, Maj.
All right. Hello, everybody. As Erica said, I am Maj. I'm here to talk to you today about my paper, Fake People Kissing, Queerbaiting, and Fan Agency. So to get us started, I wanted to talk a little bit about what queerbaiting is. It's a term that you might have heard. It's been a bit of a media buzzword in recent years, especially when a new Disney movie comes out or Harry Styles releases new music, especially. But it's a term often used in discussions surrounding the topic of LGBTQ representation in pop culture. It's gotten a lot of popularity recently, but it has its origins in online fan communities of the early 2010s. Most notably, I think Tumblr is the point of origin for it, but it has since become the subject of both media and academic fascination. The exact definition of queerbaiting is hard to pin down. Everyone has a slightly different definition of what queerbaiting is and what qualifies as queerbaiting. But for the sake of this paper, I worked with my own definition, which was boiled down from various other literature existing on queerbaiting and my own research, which is the intentional queer coding of a character or characters in order to gain or maintain a queer audience without the intention of ever explicitly addressing the subtext. So this can come in the form of gay jokes or made about a character or characters that look longingly into each other's eyes, but are still presumably, for the sake of the actual show, straight. A lot of media and academic coverage of queerbaiting has been about the negative effects that it has on LGBT representation as a whole and on queer audiences and fans. My goal with this paper, however, was to look into the potential upsides of queerbaiting, what it means for audience-creator relationships, and what it means for fans and their communities. All right, I'm ready for the next slide. So the base of my research was built on, like I said, existing scholarship about queerbaiting, as well as research done on fan studies and queer subtext and representation in film and TV. One of the most foundational texts for my paper was Henry Jenkins's Textual Poachers, which talks about the phenomenon of participatory culture, the idea that new media especially allows for fans to have different and more engaged relationships to the texts that they consume and love and hate, more so than just, say, taking a book and reading it, and that's the end of the conversation. I then conducted a case study of the CW's Supernatural and the relationship between the two of the male protagonists, Dean Winchester and Castiel, or as fans refer to it, Destiel. And the brunt of my research compares fan reactions and responses to queerbaiting on the show and how this is expressed on social media platforms. I mainly browsed for posts on Tumblr, Twitter, and Reddit, as well as blog posts and forum articles, and also the show's subsequent changes and reactions to these fan responses. But, you know, for better or worse, we are no longer in the era of forums and fan sites, which means a lot of my research on audience responses and reactions to instances of queerbaiting had to be gathered from larger social media platforms. As I mentioned, Tumblr is kind of where queerbaiting originated from, and was definitely one of the biggest kind of sites to host fan communities in the 2010s. And so there was a lot of really important information and content and research to be done there, but it has a notoriously faulty search function, and a lot of older content that I was looking for was lost to time or to deactivated accounts or deleted accounts. It was also difficult to get much information on the creator side of the dynamic, except for a few cast interviews talking about fan reactions to the queer-baited relationship. Part of the dance of queerbaiting is that the creators and cast members can never really confirm or deny their intentions regarding the queerness of these characters or whether or not they'll end up in a relationship. Maybe one day we'll get a tell-all from someone who worked on the show regarding how they talked about this relationship behind the scenes, but for now, no dice. The last limitation, of course, is kind of the arbitrary and debated nature of queerbait's definition and how relatively new the term is, especially in academia. All right, and for my findings, first of all, is queerbaiting is often viewed as a one-sided exploitative relationship, which is, the creators lure in poor, unsuspecting gay fans with the promise of a queer love story that just might happen if they watch another week. But this ignores the reality, which is that these shows have to continue to include this content and constantly up the stakes in order to maintain these fans. Supernatural is an excellent example of this. One of the characters involved in the queer-baited relationship, Castiel, was meant to be a one-off character, but fans responded so strongly to his chemistry with the protagonist Dean that he was kept on as a series regular. This happened routinely. He would be killed off, the ratings would go down, the viewership numbers would go down until the character is brought back on. As the relationship's popularity grew among fans, the interactions between the characters kept getting more and more intense. It went from simply staring into each other's eyes and standing near each other in the early seasons to bleeding out homoerotically in each other's arms, raising a child together, and having other characters constantly comment on their relationship in later seasons. The 200th episode special commented on it directly, where a fan insert character referred to Destiel by name, and the actor playing Dean stared directly into the camera. Because of its long run, Supernatural was still on the air as the term queerbaiting arose and gained popularity. And audience and media outlets became more and more critical of the show's gay jokes, queerbaiting, and lack of representation. The show's popularity started steadily declining in 2014 because of this. Ratings dropped and the fan base, which was once massive, started to trickle away, looking back on Supernatural as just a cringeworthy phase of their high school past. Eventually, and perhaps in response to this, the penultimate episode of Supernatural, Castiel confesses his romantic love for Dean in a deathbed confession, causing Destiel to trend on Twitter above the US election, which was in its second day of counting votes. This wasn't enough to absolve Supernatural of all of its queerbaiting criticism, though, and many people reacted even more critically, pointing out how the show played into the age-old bury your gays trope, and the fact that the confession went unmentioned and unreacted to by Dean in the final episode before he also died, was cited by some as evidence that Supernatural was still queerbaiting until the very end. But it brought fan engagement to Supernatural back to levels it hadn't seen since 2014. Tumblr in particular saw a 5,065% increase in engagements with the Supernatural tag in the week following the episode's air date. Secondly, is the term queerbaiting emerged in the 2010s, an era where there was a distinct lack of mainstream queer representation, especially in film and TV, popular with teenagers and young adults. There was, however, an abundance of queerbaiting. Many canonically gay characters of the time were extremely minor, one-note characters or played for laughs, but by engaging with queerbaiting, fans, particularly LGBT fans, were able to see themselves in the heroes and characters who were more well-rounded because they were presumably straight. One of the best examples of this is what happened in the recent Star Wars trilogy. Fans were led to believe that two of the male protagonists, Poe and Finn, would have a romance plotline through subtext in the film and casting crew interviews. In the lead up to the final film in the trilogy, director J.J. Abrams stated that Star Wars would see its first LGBT kiss, but when the movie came out, the kiss in question was a blink and you'll miss it scene between two extras in the background of a shot. By engaging with the queerbaiting of Finn and Poe's relationship, fans were able to create the interesting, nuanced representation that they wanted to see, if not in the movie, in their own communities. There are certainly negative effects of queerbaiting, such as the dismissal of queer fans and the continued stigmatization of queer representation on screen. But I think it should be studied with more nuance. These accusations and responses to queerbaiting create an interesting push and pull relationship between the fans and creators, which can lead to much more interesting stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maj. Great job from both of our panelists. So we did have a question from Dr. Makovsky, actually. So we're kind of starting to run a little bit short on time, but could both of you compare and contrast the various platforms you guys have mentioned? Robin, do you want to kick that one off?
By platforms, are you talking about Reddit and other social media platforms?
I believe so. Dr. Makovsky, that was your intention, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the paper primarily just looks at Reddit. It doesn't really compare it to Twitter and other platforms. But coming into this research, one of the reasons why I picked Reddit is because it has an established boundary in terms of defining that community. So for Reddit, you have subreddits that are specifically dedicated to each type of niche community. So you have subreddits for specific shows, you have subreddits for specific communities like the trans community, and having that affordance of being able to draw that boundary gives us specificity and what we can see, as opposed to Twitter, that is, for the most part, is publicly accessible. A lot of the tweets can be accessed by anyone outside of the community. With hashtags like hashtag girls like us, you would have to type that down and go through the various and different numerous posts out there that contain that hashtag. Whereas with Reddit and its subreddits, it's easier to pinpoint what a community's content is and identify what people in that particular community are like.
Maj, do you have a response as well?
Yeah, I think kind of going off what Robin said about Twitter's kind of public facing accessibility. That was also something that I found interesting that I wish I could have gotten into more in a paper, and maybe for another paper, is Twitter in particular is interesting as a kind of platform for fan communities, because the creators and actors and crew and people who work on the show are all, for the most part, also on there. And there's kind of the barrier of, there's kind of the illusion that you can interact with them directly, even if they, never check their notifications or never respond, or someone else on their team is running the account. There is kind of, it feels like the line is blurred between fan and creator relationships there, especially. God, what else? Tumblr is kind of the Wild West, or like a ghost town now. Where it was kind of exploded in the early 2010s for mostly, fan communities, fan spaces. And it was really interesting because it versus forums where you would have your one interest. You would go, if you were into Star Trek, you would go on a Star Trek forum or website and you would just post about Star Trek there, versus platforms like LiveJournal and Tumblr were kind of the big ones where they first started allowing people to kind of blend their interests and kind of interact on multiple levels with multiple different kinds of fans. So one thing that was interesting about the research I did with Supernatural and Tumblr and Queerbaiting and all that was a lot of people who had once been, in 2012, 2014, been posting about Supernatural on their blogs, on their accounts, had strayed from it because they're, because of the reputation, because they'd grown out of it, but following the show's finale and the character coming out, totally returned to it. And it was kind of like a weird renaissance that I found interesting, but yeah.
Great. I do have one more question for you guys, and either one of you or both of you can respond to this. What role do you guys think that the economics of television and film play in the discussion of LGBTQ plus relationships as they are represented in contemporary media?
So if we're strictly talking about the economics of it and their popularity, I think we could definitely see LGBTQ plus shows gaining a lot more traction compared to previous years, because, as Maj mentioned in her article, a lot of times whenever we portray queer people, it's always to be edgy, it's always to spice things up. But if you have a more meaningful, in-depth, complex, and dynamic type of representation, I think it's a lot easier to actually sell these shows as more than just queerbaiting, or more than just trying to gain relevance or an edge over its competitors. When a media text appears to be more authentic, it's easier to talk about. It's easier to get people in the publics and in the network publics to discuss this show and what is at stake for the communities it represents. And we definitely see that with Pose. There's a lot of queer folks who watch it. There's a lot of straight and cisgender folks who watch it. And a lot of them learn from this community through this particular media text.
God, I totally had a start to this sentence and I forgot what it was, but yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's also, there's been a definite shift in terms of like how we view representation. Like it's gotten to a point where in recent years, where like representation is a selling point now more than ever. Like that's why queerbaiting this is another part of my paper I didn't get to bring up now. This kind of queerbaiting, which was like kind of hinting at a protagonist being maybe gay, is kind of over now. And instead, we're moving into an era where it's like what Disney does, where every time a new movie comes out, they promise a gay character and then it's like a background character. But like people are looking for representation and diversity now more than ever in, especially in film and TV. Yeah.
I would also add that with representation, it's not just representation on screen and what we see on screen. It's also important that that representation also translates over to the writing and the production process. Because as I mentioned earlier, an actor doesn't have to perform the transness of it, but a writer also does not have to do as extensive of a research and run the risk of miswriting characters and experiences.
Absolutely. I think that those are all great points. We don't know what we don't know. And if you don't have somebody who understands that background, I think that's a huge element of it. So if it's not built in from the corporate environment all the way to the production, all the way to on film, you start to miss out on accurate representations that need to be seen. I do think it would be an interesting addition to the research line of also the buying power of people in that demographic has changed over the last decade. And it would be interesting to see how production studios are responding to that, to make the stronger case for, it makes sense for everybody for these to show up on screen more often in ways that are not the standard tropes that we're used to seeing. So thank you, Robin and Maj, for your input. We're going to move on to kind of close out our sessions. I'm going to open the floor up for a few minutes to Dr. Markovsky and Dr. Owen. Do either one of you have any closing comments now that we've heard from all of our panelists?
Sure. I mean, and I want to hear from Professor Owen, definitely. I just was going to mention just quickly that an interesting overlap of all four papers really is that misinformation really, can be spread about any community. It has particularly sad effects often, but that the fan communities can supersede that. Misinformation can be superseded by a fan community. And some of the detrimental effects can be countered that way. So that's why I was asking about the different platforms. You can find your own community, what Robin just called a subreddit community. You can include producers who are part of the queer community, writers who are part of the queer community. That general representation with a capital R, I think that can counter misinformation too. But I would love to hear from Professor Owen about anything, actually.
Thanks, Professor Markovsky. First, I'd just like to commend all of the paper presenters. This is really serious work. It's extremely well done. And again, I encourage people to go and read the full pieces on Novis. I guess I'd like to pick up on that point that Professor Markovsky raised about countering misinformation, because that seems to be a thread, again, that runs across all the papers, and the difficulty of doing that. I think in the first panel, there were a few suggestions, one that's dear to my heart, which is introducing some sort of effective media literacy programs or media literacy education into the classroom. To me, the classroom is an important place for this to happen, because it's supposed to be a dedicated learning space where people acquire these kinds of skills. But the teacher professional development for these kinds of programs is limited. I think that also some of the questions were raised about, it could also introduce other types of biases and misinformation into the process, just in terms of how it's implemented. But I still think there are ways that it can be done effectively, but it's not the end all and be all. As Hussein mentioned, it's really something that just has a lot of different elements to solving it. But I think the point that was just made is something that's not discussed as much in my field, which is political communication. But the idea of communities that can counter misinformation is something that I think has a lot of potential. There's been recently, kind of the use of micro-influencers or small groups of influencers who are able, because of the trust that they have and the community building that they've achieved, are able to, kind of bring politics even into places that aren't political, and have the potential to, I think, kind of apply some of the concepts we just heard about to correcting misinformation that we've heard from the fan communities. So, well, it seemed like these were two panels that were addressing, kind of pretty different topics. I think there's areas of commonality that are really important. And again, I really appreciate the work that all of you have done.
Yes, I too. I just second that. This is really wonderful scholarship. It speaks to the power and insights of the entire CCT student population. We're treating media that has tremendous influence. Professor Owen just mentioned influencers. Companies are realizing that and targeting influencers, hiring influencers. But again, the discourse can be changed this way. Robin has talked about Janet Mock and other spokespeople, Laverne Cox, really changing the culture. They have amazing influence within the culture. So I think that does make a difference. And suddenly we're going to see, as the panelists mentioned, not just the queer community, the various problems, which of course the entire community has. I mean, what I mean is the cis community, every community. We're going to see simple, healthy relationships between queer people. That's a change, and that's an influence, and that will counter misinformation. So just wanted to mention that too.
I'd just like to kind of build on that. When I was listening to the presentations on this panel, I was thinking about how the Hallmark Channel has started to introduce, queer characters and gay couples. And but as Maj was saying, they're oftentimes, they're never there was one that had the folk that they were the main characters, but they're kind of the characters in the wedding, or they show up and talk to other people that are the focus of it, as a couple. But I think that, they're always upbeat, positive portrayals. So even ending up in the Hallmark Channel, I think, is a good illustration of the points that were made.
Yes, great example. And again, these two people introduced me to Pose. It's an amazing show. You can see why it's spreading all over the internet. That relationship between a cis man, a straight man, and this beautiful woman, trans woman, it's really a moving relationship. I mean, some of the scenes are just incredibly touching. And it has you rooting for one and then not rooting for it. I mean, I'm not going to give away anything about that show, but it's really worth watching it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Fan, Megan, Maj, Robin, and Dr. Markovsky and Dr. Owen for joining us today. We appreciate all of your time. Before we head out, I do want to have a quick word from our editor-in-chief, Rohan Smaji. Can you give us a brief update on Novus?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Erica. I won't take a lot of time. I think we're running out of time already, but I would like to say a word or two. So first of all, I think all of the papers that we have seen this year, not just the ones that are presented in this panel, but also all the submissions that we received this year were some of the most excellent submissions, and which made our jobs even tougher because we had to sift through all of them to present the 5 papers that we have in the journal. So for this panel, we had the 4 papers, simply based on the themes of misinformation and LGBTQ plus representation. But we also had another paper which was based on, it was a content analysis paper on CSR. We're going to make sure that we send out the journal to the attendees for this panel as well, so that you can check out that article. But yeah, I mean, the amount of work that the Novus staff had to put through and the amount of work that the authors had to go through, and we understand how rigorous the entire peer review process is. Sometimes you end up reading comments that you do not necessarily agree with, but you still have to address them. And so it's a commendable job that you have done. And I think the reward that you have received at the end of the 3 months is, I hope it is worth it. And finally, I think Erica over here has been solely responsible for organizing this entire colloquium. So I extend my gratitude to her. I don't think without her, we would have been able to establish this amazing platform where we could have these discussions and these discourses and have a true exchange of ideas, which is what interdisciplinary research is supposed to be about. At the end of the day, Novus is an extension of CCT. Communication, culture, and technology is the core of this entire process, which is all about interdisciplinarity. And so, thank you, Professor Owen, Professor Markovsky, Professor Tinkham, for engaging students with topics which are so disparate, which maybe people outside the fields of interdisciplinarity would not be able to understand how these connect. But here we saw connections between something from culture studies to quantitative research to statistical analysis. And it's just amazing how that confluence comes together and people from totally different backgrounds are able to engage with each other and really see through the social disruptions of technology. So I thank you all. I thank the professors over here, the panelists, the attendees. And with that, I hand it over to you again, Erica.
Yep, so just a couple last minute housekeeping things. Like Rohan mentioned, as soon as we are done here, I'm going to be sending out the download link to all of our attendees for the 2022 journal edition. So we're super excited. Today is our launch day. It's a culmination of a year's worth of hard work for our authors, our peer reviewers, and the Novus staff. So we hope that you'll take the time to read that and look at that 5th article that we have that we weren't able to feature in our panel today. And then we do have a podcast coming out with Dana Boyd. She was a visiting faculty member for CCT. So we do have that coming from Hussein. So keep an eye out on our social media platforms for that. You can keep in touch with Novus for future events and what we're going to be doing for the next academic year at gnovisjournal.georgetown.edu. And otherwise, thank you so much. And we will be sending out the recording of this webinar for you guys to share to friends and family. Otherwise, thank you guys so much, and we will see you next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.